Picture this. You're a German fighter pilot in 1943, sitting in the cockpit of your Messerschmitt, and you've just shot down your 20th Allied bomber. You're an ace, decorated, respected, and honestly, you feel pretty much invincible. Then someone tells you the Americans have a new fighter. You see it for the first time, and you actually laugh. It looks awkward, it performs poorly, and you radio back to base, making jokes about how pathetic it is. Fast forward 6 months. You're in that same cockpit, your hands are shaking, sweat is pouring down your face, and all you can think about is surviving the next 5 minutes because there's a P-51 Mustang on your tail, and you know you're probably going to die. This is the story of the most dramatic turnaround in aviation history. The story of how one airplane went from being the joke of the sky to the most feared killing machine over Europe. Let's set the scene properly because you need to understand just how bad things were for the Allies in 1943. The air war over Europe isn't going well. Actually, that's an understatement. It's a complete disaster. American bomber crews are being slaughtered at rates that would make your stomach turn. We're talking about losses so severe that some bomb groups are losing more men than they can replace. Young guys, 18, 19, 20 years old, are climbing into B-17s and B-24s knowing there's a real chance this is their last day on Earth. The problem is brutally simple. The bombers need to strike deep into Germany to hit factories, oil refineries, and military installations. But every Allied fighter they have, the P-47 Thunderbolt, the Spitfire, they all have the same fatal flaw. They don't have the range. They can escort the bombers for maybe the first hour or two of the mission, but then their fuel runs low and they have to turn back. From that moment on, those bombers are completely alone, and that's when the slaughter begins. German fighter pilots have turned this into a science. They watch and wait for the Allied escorts to leave, and then they pounce. Formations of Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s tear into the bomber formations like wolves attacking sheep. The bombers have guns, sure, but they're slow, they're not maneuverable, and German pilots have been perfecting their attack techniques for years. They know exactly where to hit a B-17 to make it explode. They know how to approach from the sun so the gunners can't see them coming. They know everything, and they use that knowledge to devastating effect. The statistics are absolutely horrifying. Some missions lose 20, 30, or even 40% of the bombers that take off. Think about what that means. Imagine being in a room with 10 of your friends and knowing that by tomorrow, 3 or 4 of them will be dead. That's the reality these bomber crews are living with every single day. The psychological toll is crushing. Men are breaking down, refusing to fly, and honestly, you can't blame them. Back in England and America, commanders are tearing their hair out trying to figure out what to do. They need to hit targets deep in Germany. The strategic bombing campaign is essential to winning the war. But at this rate, they're going to run out of bombers and crews before they run out of targets. They need a fighter that can go the distance, but every engineer tells them the same thing. It's impossible. You can't build a fighter with enough range to escort bombers to Berlin and back. The fuel tanks would be too big, the plane would be too heavy, and it wouldn't be able to fight even if it got there. This is where the P-51 Mustang enters the story, and trust me, its entrance is not impressive. The Mustang was originally designed for the British, who needed fighters desperately in 1940. North American aviation threw it together in record time, and the first models that came off the production line were, to put it bluntly, pretty mediocre. They had Allison engines that worked fine at low altitude, but completely lost power above 15,000 feet. And guess where all the bomber escorts needed to operate? You got it. High altitude. So these early P-51s get sent into combat, and German pilots encounter them, and they're genuinely not worried. There are accounts of Luftwaffe aces who said they actually felt bad for the American pilots stuck flying Mustangs. Some German pilots reported that they would ignore Mustangs in combat and focus on other threats because the Mustang just wasn't dangerous enough to worry about. Can you imagine that? Your enemy literally doesn't consider you worth their time. The mockery was real, and it was widespread. German intelligence reports from this period described the Mustang as an inferior aircraft that poses no significant threat to Luftwaffe operations. Some pilots called it the American joke. There are even stories of German aces wagering on how quickly they could shoot down a Mustang if they ever bothered to engage one. The disrespect was total and complete. But here's where things get interesting, because someone refused to accept failure. The Mustang had an incredible airframe. It was sleek, it was aerodynamic, and it had potential. The problem was just the engine. So a small group of engineers and military planners started asking a crazy question. What if we took out that Allison engine and replaced it with something better? What if we used the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine that was making the Spitfire so successful? Now, this is not a simple swap. We're not talking about changing the oil. This is a massive undertaking that requires redesigning huge portions of the aircraft. The Merlin engine is different in size, weight, and power characteristics. Everything from the engine mounts to the cooling system to the propeller has to be re-engineered. And it's expensive, really expensive, and there's no guarantee it will even work. The safe bet would be to just scrap the Mustang program and focus resources elsewhere. But they decide to try it anyway. In late 1942, they put a Merlin engine in a Mustang and took it up for test flights. And the moment that engine roars to life and that plane takes off, everyone watching knows something special has just happened. This thing doesn't just fly better. It flies spectacularly. The power-to-weight ratio is perfect. The top speed jumps to over 400 miles per hour. The climb rate is exceptional. And most importantly, it performs beautifully at high altitude. But the real game changer is the range. With the Merlin engine being more fuel efficient and with the addition of external drop tanks, this new P-51B can fly for over 8 hours. Let me repeat that. 8 hours. That means it can escort bombers all the way to Berlin, engage in combat, and still have enough fuel to make it home. This is something that's never been done before. This is the plane that's going to change everything. The first P-51Bs start arriving in Europe in late 1943, and at first, the German pilots don't realize what's happening. They see Mustangs showing up deeper and deeper into German territory, but they think it's a fluke. Maybe these are special long-range reconnaissance versions or something. They still remember the pathetic early Mustangs, and they assume this is more of the same. The first major dogfight between P-51Bs and Luftwaffe fighters happens in December 1943, and it's an absolute shock to the German pilots involved. These aren't the clumsy, weak Mustangs they remember. These are completely different machines. The P-51B can match or exceed the performance of the Bf-109 and the FW-190 in almost every category. It's faster in level flight. It accelerates better. It can outdive anything the Germans have. And in a turning fight, it's competitive with aircraft that were supposed to be superior dogfighters. But speed and maneuverability are only part of the story. The P-51 has 6 Browning M250 caliber machine guns, 3 in each wing. These aren't pea shooters. A 50 caliber round is massive. It's designed to penetrate armor and destroy engines. When all 6 guns fire together, they put out an absolutely devastating amount of firepower. A 2-second burst from a P-51 contains enough rounds to completely disintegrate most German fighters. American pilots quickly figure out the best tactics for using the Mustang. They learn to use their speed advantage to control the engagement. If they want to fight, they fight. If they want to disengage, they just push the throttle forward and leave. German fighters can't catch them. They also learn to use altitude. The P-51 performs better at high altitude than most German fighters, So American pilots start flying top cover above the bombers and diving down on German attackers. It's devastatingly effective. And then the Mustang pilots start doing something that absolutely terrifies the Luftwaffe. They stop just defending the bombers. They start hunting. Groups of P-51s begin sweeping ahead of bomber formations, looking for German fighters before they can get organized. They strafe airfields, shooting up parked aircraft and attacking planes as they try to take off or land. They chase German fighters all the way back to their bases and then circle overhead, waiting for them to try to land so they can shoot them down when they're most vulnerable. This is psychological warfare at its finest. German pilots are used to being the hunters. They're used to having safe bases where they can rest and regroup. Now, nowhere is safe. There are stories of Luftwaffe pilots who developed severe anxiety because they knew that even if they survived combat with the bombers, there might be a Mustang waiting for them when they tried to land with low fuel and low ammunition. The impact on German morale is catastrophic. These are veteran pilots who've been fighting since the beginning of the war. They've faced Spitfires, Hurricanes, P-47s, and they've always felt like they had a chance. But the Mustang is different. It's faster than they are, it has more range, and in the hands of a skilled pilot, it's just as maneuverable. For the first time, many German pilots feel genuinely outclassed. Let me give you a specific example that really drives this home. There was a German ace named Heinz Nock who wrote a diary throughout the war. In early 1943, his entries are confident, almost cocky. He talks about shooting down bombers, about the superiority of German tactics and aircraft. Then, in early 1944, after his first encounters with P-51s, his tone completely changed. He writes about the fear he feels when he sees Mustangs. He describes watching friends get shot down by American fighters they couldn't shake or outrun. He talks about the nightmares. This is a man who's been in combat for years, and suddenly he's scared. And it's not just one pilot. This pattern repeats across the entire Luftwaffe. The Germans start losing not just aircraft, but irreplaceable veteran pilots. And here's the thing about air combat. Experience matters enormously. A pilot with 500 hours of combat experience is exponentially more effective than a rookie with 50 hours. Germany is losing their experienced pilots faster than it can train new ones, and the new pilots they do train are nowhere near as skilled because fuel shortages mean they can't train properly. Meanwhile, American pilots are gaining experience with every mission. They're learning what works and what doesn't. They're sharing tactics and techniques. The Air Force has an institutional advantage. When they figure out an effective tactic, they teach it to everyone. German pilots, by this point in the war, are often isolated and flying with squadrons that have been decimated. The experience gap that used to favor Germany has completely reversed. By the spring of 1944, the transformation is complete. The Mustang isn't just another fighter. It's the dominant fighter in Europe. German pilots see them, and their first instinct is to run. Not because they're cowards, but because they're rational people who understand that engaging a Mustang is likely to get them killed. Some Luftwaffe units start reporting that their pilots refuse to take off if scouts report large numbers of Mustangs in the area. The strategic impact is enormous. Remember, the whole point of the long-range fighter escort was to protect bombers so they could hit targets deep in Germany. With Mustangs providing escort, the bomber losses dropped dramatically. Instead of losing 30% of the force, missions now lose 5 or 10%. That's still significant, but it's sustainable. The bombing campaign can continue, and it does. German factories get destroyed. Oil refineries go up in flames. The transportation network gets wrecked. And the Luftwaffe can't stop it because they've lost control of their own airspace. This is unprecedented. For the first time in the war, Germany cannot defend its own territory from air attack. The psychological and strategic implications are massive. By D-Day in June 1944, the Allies had almost complete air superiority over Western Europe. German pilots who do manage to take off are flying 1 or 2 missions before they get shot down. The average lifespan of a Luftwaffe pilot at this point is measured in days, not months or years. The experienced aces who survive the early encounters with Mustangs are either dead, captured, or so traumatized they're no longer effective. And the numbers back all of this up. P-51 Mustangs are credited with destroying more enemy aircraft than any other Allied fighter in the European theater. The final count is something like 4,950 aircraft destroyed in the air, plus thousands more destroyed on the ground. No other fighter comes close to those numbers. The Mustang absolutely dominated the sky. But here's what makes this story really special. It's not just about the airplane. It's about the people who refused to give up on it. When those early Mustangs failed, it would have been easy to say, well, we tried, let's move on. But instead, someone looked at the problem and said, we can fix this. Let's try something different. Let's take a risk. And that decision, that willingness to think creatively and take chances, changed the entire course of the war. Think about what the German pilots must have felt. They started the war believing they were flying the best aircraft in the world, trained by the best system, part of the most effective air force ever created. And for a few years, that was true. But then they got complacent. They assumed their advantage would last forever. They mocked the Mustang because it didn't immediately measure up to their standards. And that arrogance cost them everything. There's a deeper lesson here about underestimating your opponents. In war, in business, in life, the thing that looks weak today might become your biggest threat tomorrow. Evolution happens. Adaptation happens. The side that learns faster and adapts better usually wins. The Germans had a head start and superior equipment, but they didn't innovate fast enough. The Allies, meanwhile, took their failures, learned from them, and created something better. The P-51 Mustang is also a testament to the power of collaboration. It was an American airframe with a British engine, flown by pilots from multiple Allied nations, supported by ground crews and engineers from all over the world. Nobody did this alone. It took thousands of people working together, sharing knowledge, and supporting each other to make it work. That's how you win wars. That's how you overcome impossible challenges. And let's talk about the pilots for a moment. These were young men, most of them barely old enough to drink, flying into combat hundreds of miles from home with nothing but their skills and their aircraft to keep them alive. The courage that it takes is almost incomprehensible. They knew the risks. They knew the statistics. But they climbed into those cockpits anyway because they believed in something bigger than themselves. There are so many individual stories of heroism associated with the Mustang. Pilots who fought against overwhelming odds and survived. Pilots who sacrificed themselves to save their wingmen. Pilots who limped home and shot up aircraft that should have fallen out of the sky. Every single one of them contributed to turning the joke into a legend. By the time the war ended in May 1945, the P-51 Mustang had become synonymous with Allied air power. It had achieved a level of dominance that's rarely seen in military history. The Germans, who had once mocked it, now spoke of it with a mixture of respect and fear. Some Luftwaffe veterans after the war admitted that the Mustang was the finest fighter aircraft of World War II. Coming from men who had flown against everything the Allies had, that's high praise. But perhaps the most telling sign of the Mustang's impact is this. After the war, when the U.S. Air Force needed to choose which piston engine fighters to keep in service, they decided on the Mustang. Not the P-47, not the P-38, but the Mustang. It served through the Korean War and beyond. Some countries continued to fly Mustangs into the 1980s. That's a 40-year service life for an aircraft that people once called a joke. So what's the takeaway from all of this? What's the lesson we should carry forward? I think it's pretty simple. Never count yourself out just because you had a rough start. Never assume that early failure means permanent failure. The first version of the Mustang was mediocre, but that didn't mean the concept was wrong. It just needed improvement. How many times in your own life have you given up on something because it didn't work perfectly the first time? And on the flip side, never get so arrogant that you stop paying attention to your competition. Those German pilots thought they had it all figured out. They thought their dominance was permanent. They mocked their enemy instead of respecting the threat. And that complacency destroyed them. Stay humble. Stay alert. Keep learning. Because the moment you think you've got it all figured out is the moment someone else is going to surprise you. The P-51 Mustang went from laughingstock to legend in less than a year. It proved that innovation beats tradition, that persistence beats arrogance, and that the only way to truly fail is to stop trying. Those guns spoke, all right, and their message echoed across the skies of Europe, turning mockery into terror and jokes into legends. If this story inspired you, if it got you fired up about one of the greatest comebacks in military history, then do me a favor. Hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel because we've got so many more incredible World War II stories coming your way. Stories about courage, innovation, and the kind of determination that changes the world. You don't want to miss a single one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.